Welcome, everyone. Jordan and I are so excited to talk about this topic, everything tulips and daffodils. So, we're going to keep this a little bit more towards the field tulip and daffodil side. We're going to talk about a lot of things from just the successes we've had, the failures we had, the varieties that we're loving as well as not loving. And then we're also going to talk about just what does that plan look like for 2025. So we've got a lot to catch up on. Jordan, I'm going to hand it over to you because you're knee deep in tulip
I'm
and daffodil
me.
season.
Yes,
And one question we always get is who
I
is
know. I'm
Jordan?
gonna do
So Jordan, we're going to
it.
introduce you this time.
Yes, I know. I'm like, I am going to introduce myself because everyone asks. Hey guys, I am Jordan. I own Jordan's Flower Farm. I'm a year two flower farmer based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. We sell retail bouquets at the farmers market, and we now have a farm stand. And then we also sell wholesale to florists. So we do about 50-50 mix between the two.
So Jordan is clearly in a warmer zone than me. I feel like sometimes we live in completely different countries just because of how far ahead you guys are in the season. And I am celebrating even seeing buds on my tulips, or at this stage, like having tulips that feel like they're 80% there, which is really not traditional for someone like me in 7A in New Jersey. So we're on like two different time spans here.
Yeah.
Jordan, do you want to talk about when your daffodils started peeking out up? And let's start with
Do.
daffodils
Let's see.
first.
So I want to say that we started getting daffs. Gosh, it's probably been, I'm going to scroll back in my phone so I can like tell y'all accurately, but I want to say that we've had daffodils now for, they started in February. So I was harvesting like buckets full at the end of February, which is not normal for us. So I would say everything is like 3 weeks ahead of schedule. So it was just kind of like out of nowhere. We were having massive harvests and we're just like, what is happening? Like we thought we had probably another month before we were like full on into harvest season. So it's been so busy, but it's been really good. So we started getting daffodils. We were selling to florists. We were occasionally opening the farm stand at that point because we just had daffodils. But I find that like the daffodils on their own don't do as well in the farm stand. But we were selling those and it was going really really well, and then just like all of a sudden we were like drowning in tulips as well. So we've just been busy, I would say, for the last 3.5 weeks now. We've just been harvesting. And I was talking to my husband last night, and I think that we are probably at the very end of our tulip harvest. I've got like one more variety that I'm waiting to see, like, is it going to bloom or is it going to fail? But we're like almost done. But our daffodils are actually still going strong, which I find, I don't know, surprising because I think, I mean, I'm a year two flower farmer, so I don't always know, all the ins and outs of it. But I would have thought that, that our daffodils would have ended first. And then, we would have had tulips past daffodils, but we still have plenty of daffodils in the gooseneck stage that were like, I went and harvested like one little section yesterday and got like 70, like super quickly. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, do you want to
Well,
dive
well,
into
actually, I
to
have a
detail?
follow-up question for you because Jordan moved farms last year, which she had a pretty big farm in year one in terms of setting up that infrastructure. And then she moved to, I would say it's kind of like an equally big type of setup, if not bigger. When did you get your daffodils and your tulips into the ground in a place like Oklahoma?
So I think we got them all into the ground. It was during November, I want to say, November or December. I think it was November. I think it was like towards the end of November is when we started getting them all into the ground,
So
which
you're
is fine.
able,
And I think
yeah.
we could actually plant them later than that here. I think it would really just depend on like the hours of cold that they've already had for daffodils and tulips. So I know some people here will get them in because we don't get enough cold hours in Oklahoma. So you do either have to buy them like 5C chilled or 9C chilled, which is what we did last year. Or you have to chill them yourself because we're not going to get enough cold hours. So if you chill them yourself, you can wait till like January, to plant them. But we went ahead and did like 9C from a cost perspective. And then we put them in November. So because our coldest months are like January and February here.
That's really nice because
Like,
it's a really short crop for you guys in terms of turnaround timing. You're
yeah,
looking at like
it is.
60 to 90 days, which for us
Right.
it's a lot longer. Usually we're getting them into the ground in November. I'll push it maybe around Thanksgiving or so. So
Yeah.
yeah, Wanda's saying that USDA changed her growing zone. All of my zone got upgraded. Did yours get upgraded too?
Yeah, we're 7B now here.
Which is wild because I'm 7A and
I know, when you
we
said that, I was like, "It's so weird." It's
yeah,
because it's so different between the 2 of us, like, when we're
exactly.
talking, like, we're just but it also is just, like, a weird season for us this year, like, already, like, it's just not a normal I don't know, tulips have felt like a 2.5 week whirlwind of, like, just harvesting as much as possible
It
because it got so warm so fast, which caused things to fail because it got so warm so fast.
It definitely, I think, was a milder winter for you guys. It was not as mild as last year for us. We got snow.
Mm.
I was just telling Jordan earlier that we unexpectedly went down to 27 last night. I didn't cover my tulips. A lot of my tulips are showing buds. If not, they're like, they would need another week of full sunshine to be ready. They were frozen. But tulips are a lot more hardy than we give them credit for. And I went outside right before this live, and they are actually thawing and they don't look like that they're too damaged. So I'm going to do a separate video on that, including harvesting, post harvesting, conditioning, storage. So we're going to not talk about those topics because there's so much to just talk about on the other topics that we were planning for. But Jordan, so you had talked about getting your tulips in a little bit earlier. You bought some pre-chilled bulbs, and I know we're
Mhm.
jumping the gun here, but generally, how was the stem length of your tulips? Because anyone who gets short tulips, typically it's because you're just not getting enough cool temperatures for those bulbs that need at least, it's like 16 weeks or so of cool temperatures.
Oh, I would say that it definitely helped having done we did some 9C and then some just regular. And I would say that Stemlink has been okay for us this year. It could be better. I think that it's gotten better. So, kind of what happened weather-wise here is it just got like blazing hot. And so it was bringing all the tulips on short. Other than like our single stems, but anything that was like a double, it was just bringing it on short, which was fine. Like we just pivoted and we sold them in jars, like no big deal. It's fine. But stem length wise, so weather wise, what it's done is it was like 75, 80 for like a week there here. And then it dropped back down and has been cooler. And so it dropping back down has really helped things like stretch before we harvested them. So stem length, I would say over the last like week and a half has been really good. That first week, I mean, and I was just like panicking because I'm like, I have 4-inch tulips. Like, what am I doing with this? But it was really just like there were like one like Queensland super short. And then Columbus for us,
Hmm.
insanely short. Like I won't grow it again now.
Wow,
I'm talking
interesting.
like
Yeah.
Columbus was like, I mean, just short.
So
I
Yeah, Queensland is a double fringe, right? That's the Queensland you're
yes,
talking about. Double fringes are known to be a little bit shorter, so that is
yeah.
what you would expect. Columbus, I would actually expect it to have a little bit more taller stems. Columbus is a variety that is like we're calling it overloved at this point. Everyone loves it, so it is a really popular variety to grow. And I would say normally I don't see short stems, so that's interesting that you guys experience
So
that.
question, do you know is Columbus a double early?
I don't think it's a double early. But I also
That's what
it's
I'm
not like a foxy foxtrot where you're like, yeah, like I know I'm gonna get a short stem. Columbus is
okay, but
not
what was
categorized as that.
interesting is our Foxy Foxtrot had great stem length.
Huh. Okay.
Um, but okay, so this is like a weird, I have no idea how this happened. And I have looked back because I took like videos from when we planted. Because if you know anything about Jesse and I, like we're terrible at labeling things. So I, of course, labeled nothing that I planted in the field. But what I did do is I set all the crates out and lined them and then took a video of the crates in front of where I planted. So I know generally where things are. So, like, as it comes up, I know what variety it is. But what happened with Foxy Foxtrot, and I can't figure it out of how this happened. And I don't know if it was like a supplier thing or what, but somehow it got mixed in with a single variety. It looks like maybe like a salmon impression, which is one that we ordered, but it is one that's not planted near it. So I can't figure it out. But so it kind of like shaded out the Foxy Foxtrot. So they like lengthened, I think, because it was just had a bigger, taller tulip over it. So like not planned, but it actually kind of worked really well. And it helped us get like good, I would say like at least like 12-inch stem length on them. Like I was really happy with them, which
Yeah,
is like
that
still on the shorter side, but plenty, it's long enough for a wrap.
which is really all that matters. So for
Oh,
those of you who are new to tulips, tulips have different cooling periods as we just talked about, but they also will come in different stem length expectations, and that's just based off of the way they're bred. So I talked about a variety called Foxy Foxtrot. It's this creamy yellow with little bit of streaks of pink. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous tulip.
gorgeous.
I didn't grow it this year because it is really, really short and I just didn't want to deal with it. But after seeing Jordan's pictures, I'm putting it back on the
Grow it.
list for next year. So there are varieties out there that are just known to be short, and that's something that you absolutely need to be researching if you live in a warmer zone and you're not getting pre-chilled bulbs, because now you are really running the risk of having a really unusable stem for wraps. Now, that being said, I
Hmm.
live in New Jersey, so I would say that my Foxy Foxtrot, actually the shortests were around 13 inches. So for me, I typically will get 14 to 16 inches. And
Yeah.
yeah, so it's all relative,
So
right?
that's
But
interesting, right? Yeah, because
yeah.
we've never really talked about that until just now. So what I consider to be a long tulip, because I am in Oklahoma where it's hot, is like actually very different than what you consider to
Oh
be a
my
long
God. It would,
tulip. But if I
yeah,
get
it's
like 12 inches, I'm like, whoa, finally a long tulip.
oh my
Like
God, 12
because
inches. I'm almost like putting it into a second tier when I sell it to
yeah,
florists. I'm like, it's not long enough,
no,
but it is
yeah,
because like no one needs an 18 long tulip for the majority of the work, whether you're a florist or selling
exactly.
retail. So
And like singles do great. Like we have great stem length on like, any of like your Darwin hybrids and all of that. But maybe we jump into, well,
well,
we're a
so
little bit
so
out of
so I
order.
do want to ask you about daffodils. How do your daffodils do in terms of stem length?
Okay, so that was really interesting. So we did, and I wanted to have it like all ready for y'all, but we've been so busy that I don't have it like all the details together. So I want to say that we trialed like, let's say 20 different varieties of daffodils. I did like, but I did like 100. Like I wasn't doing like a full crate. I was doing like 100 because I just wanted, because in Oklahoma, it is really hard, like stem length wise, to figure out what is going to do well here. And so I didn't want,
I was gonna ask, where were you sourcing bulbs for 100 in a
Edney
single
had them
variety?
for 100 last year.
I'm sorry?
Edney
Oh,
had them.
Edney had 100.
Hmm.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, they did.
And how were the
So
prices for 100 from Edney? Like
they
roughly, do you
were.
remember what they were? Because I know that other places sell in smaller increments like 100, and it kind of becomes, it's not cost prohibitive, but because daffodils can perennialize, you can really make them work. But typically I try not to buy 100 for that reason.
Yeah, I want to say, hold on,
Everyone in the chat, Jordan and I, like are just, we go back and forth really quickly, but always feel free to put questions into the chat and we will do our best to read and address them.
yeah, I mean, so in the 100 quantities, they're definitely pricier. Probably not something a decision I would make now. But they were averaging $1 a
A
bulb.
dollar, yeah. Because when I was
Yeah.
looking at wholesale daffodils from a certain supplier, I think it was ADR, they were running about
Hmm.
50 cents a bulb. And
Yeah,
so I honestly haven't done enough research with the other suppliers to look at the cost. But again, they perennialize. So it's a
exactly.
yeah, like it's less of a concern for me whether or not I'm paying 50 cents or 70 cents versus with a tulip, I really care about the cost of the bulb because I'm only getting one stem out of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And actually, that was like kind of surprising to me because in my head, and I guess I just haven't looked at that sheet in a while because in my head, I kept thinking it was probably like 80 cents, but that's because when I'm ordering larger quantities now, because now like new orders I'm placing, I'm ordering 350 daffodils, not 100. So that is closer to like that 80-cent range. But to your point, I'm less concerned about that with daffodils because they're going to come back year after year. And so it's really just that like one-time investment to get those daffodils.
Yeah. So then going back to
Oh,
stem length on daffodils, because I am
yes.
seeing my field daffodils pop up and they are stout, but they haven't yet flowered. So from my experience growing them hydroponically, they should be
Mhm.
breaking through that paper sheath like any day now.
Yeah.
And if they do, I would literally have 3.5 inch stems, maybe
What
4 inches.
varieties?
That's
What
Sir
varieties
Winston
do you have?
Churchill. And I've been able to get at least, I would say, the shortest stems hydroponically are 8 inches. I've been able to get up to 14 inches on my Sir Winston Churchills. And like 14 inches is not the common. I would say on average, I'm getting 10 inches or so. So it's a
Mhm.
little bit short for a wrap, but if I obviously cut down the tulips, then it's still pretty adequate to put into any kind of vase.
I'm just wondering, okay, so I also have Sir Winston Churchill, but when I was going through my notes to prepare for today, I have like no notes by it, and I didn't actually pay attention to where I planted our daffodils. So I'm like, has it not come up? Like, or the other thing is that it must have been really short and I never even messed with it. So I know yellow cheerfulness, like this tall, like so short, never even touched them. But
What
stem length wise, go ahead.
like what's your tallest daffodil in terms of stem length?
Probably Tahiti that's behind me, and I would say it's probably
That looks at least like
18
a foot.
inches. Yeah, I those are probably shorter ones. There's in that picture that we'll show later. I mean, they are tall. They're really good stem length.
Are
And I
Tahiti's the one that were kind of blown open in the field, or were that
mm-mm.
okay?
uh yes, that's why I have a picture of
They
them.
were. So let me show
It's
you. This
because
is
I
what
brought
her
them home.
Tahiti looked like, and we'll talk about why they're all blown open later.
Oh, it's
But
not the one blown open in the field. It's the one that's in the picture of like retail favorites.
this one, oh, that's a tall one.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
so tall. So
Okay,
for
that is
retail, if you're gonna
totally
put them into
workable.
wraps,
Yeah, in your
so
bouquets.
workable for wraps.
Yep.
Yeah. And honestly, I've found on most of our daffodils that we've had extremely great stem length. But I think important to know, and just an incredible resource is that what I did when I was researching which varieties we wanted to trial, I used the Floret library for all of it. And so I like in detail went through her daffodil list. And because we had dealt with short stems on tulips, our daffodils they weren't short last year either. But I went through like her list and checked out like every single one of them so I could figure out like, if anything says 12 inches, like we're not growing it here. And I really want things to be saying like at least 16 inches for us to be growing it here. So I haven't really had an issue with stem length except for on
Just a couple varieties, it
yellow
sounds like. Yeah.
cheerfulness and apricot whirl. Have you grown
Okay.
that one?
I
It's
I've
so
only
cute.
grown one daffodil variety because I thought that daffodils had like a 3 to 5 day vase life. I didn't realize all the varieties they came
So
in,
good.
and I only grew daffodils because I realized I could hydroponically force them. So
Yeah.
next year, I'm definitely going to be growing a lot more daffodils. They provide a lot more structure, like not structure, but like texture and just interest when I mix them in with tulips. Don't get me wrong, tulips on their own look fantastic, but I think it takes them up to this like next level. And there's also just so many kinds of daffodils where you've got these double flowering ones. So Sir Winston Churchill's one of them that we talked about. And then you've got the Tahiti that kind of looks like the normal daffodil that you would think about, just
Mm-hmm.
in better colors. And so you would never
Yes.
even think that both of them are daffodils and they could do well in a bouquet on their own together. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was kind
You
of
know, the
just
other thing that I have found that was kind of surprising to me is I almost found that our florists like daffodils better than tulips. Like I just feel like they kind of go crazy over the daffodils. Like they're so excited for them, and the tulips are kind of just like meh about unless it's what's that one that like everyone loves?
for tulips.
Yeah, it's always sold out.
I
I'm
feel like
blanking on the
Columbus
name.
is in that category as well as the parrots. But
Yeah, true.
but I guess that's interesting to hear because our florists definitely want tulips. And I
Hmm.
know that Jordan's florists throughout the entire season, whether it was winter or even now spring, are more meh about tulips. So just
Yeah,
maybe like a regional difference there. But I just think that there's a lot more potential with daffodils that probably I still need to figure out. And I'll say that I bought Sir Winston Churchill because I saw Nicole from Flower Hill Farm grow it years ago and she loved it. And I was like, yeah, I'll grow that one. And it's also fragrant in a nice way. So people are
oh,
always pleasantly
I love them.
surprised. Yeah, that's the thing, like, daffodils smell
Oh,
really good, and you
so
don't
good.
realize it until you
They're
grow
actually
fresh ones.
probably my favorite spring flower. Like, I get so like, when tulips are done, I'm like, "Thank God." Like, I'm so ready to be done with them. But when, like, daffodils start to fade, I'm like, "No, I'm not gonna see you for, like, a whole 'nother year," and I'm, like, genuinely sad about
Aw.
it. But yeah, Nicole has great content on Flower Hill Farm for daffodils, and then I love Danielle at North Lawn Flower Farm also has really great
She
content on
always has good
daffodils.
content on flowers, though,
She
yeah.
always has the best
Yeah, she's like
content,
the
yeah.
YouTube
Oh,
or YouTube version of Florette in my view for the library.
yeah. But so then let's talk about, and I know we've talked about this a little before, but I have a new thing that I haven't got to tell you about yet. Daffodils. So like, okay, but they're gonna bloom for, a month and a half, and if you have a small space, like you're just wasting that space the rest of the year. And so I know we've talked about yarrow, overplanting them with yarrow and having that. But I was listening to a North Lawn Flower Farm video last night, and she said that Sarah Raven overplants her daffodils with dahlias.
I
I had
I heard
no,
about that,
you knew
yes.
that. I did not know about that.
I think
And like
that's yeah. I think that's super smart, and like intercropping is something that I started getting into this year. So like what I did was not daffodils, but I planted lilies below tulips, and it's working
Mhm.
so far. And I'm
Yeah.
finding that things like lilies or even daffodils in this case, which when they come up and you want them to perennialize, they're obviously going to have leaves left over. They could potentially provide good shading for
Mhm.
other flowers, like cool flowers that need a little bit more time, because our
Yeah.
springs are now all just getting so much shorter, and the cool flowers don't have enough time in terms of cold weather to bloom appropriately. I think the only downside I see about with daffodils is that the foliage does end up kind of falling over and drooping over, so it might shade it a little bit too much. But I'm just trying to take this concept to that next level. So instead of using something like shade cloth, maybe I can use something like a flower. And there was a
Right.
comment or question in the group asking, would shade cloth over the shorty tulips encourage longer stem length? And the answer is
Oh,
absolutely, because
yeah.
one of the worst nemesis of tulips is extremely hot weather over like a period of, we'll call it 3 to 5 days, because what ends up
Mhm.
happening is it's just rushing the maturity of that bloom, whereas normally that bloom would have a little bit more time to stretch. So if you put shade cloth over it, you are blocking out that heat and the sun, and you will buy yourself some extra days, if not sometimes weeks, with shade cloth.
Yes. And we are planning to do that next year
With shade
for
cloth.
sure. Shade cloth is going over the tulips next year.
Yeah. And
I mean,
well, so as like I think that in Oklahoma, it's mind blowing to me how early people put shade cloth on tunnels. Like you guys could
yeah,
potentially put them on in February.
I know. I know. Our tunnel's not closed yet, so we haven't had to like mess with it yet. But I think next year that we will likely have to have shade cloth on by, you know, early March for
Yeah.
sure.
So
But you're probably right. It's actually probably mid-February because
yeah.
it's just starting. If it's like this year where it warms up so early, which
And
was just not normal for us. I feel like normally it would be March, but who knows now?
I who knows what the weather is going to be like year after year at this point. But going back to what you were saying, Jordan, so are you going to try to do daffodils and dahlias potentially together?
I think I am, and that's just because we have a large space. Well, I don't know. It's kind of going back and forth on it. So a couple of things. So I got some of Florette's dahlia seeds, and I don't actually know where I want to put them yet. So I thought, like, okay, well, I could do them there. Like that's an option. But I really want to do it with yarrow, and I did order some yarrow plugs to put there. So I'm like toying with the idea of like, okay, well, I've already started the Florette dahlia seeds. Like I could put those there. My concern is like weeds, and I don't really want weeds to be like mixing in with hers, like, because I'm really excited about those. So I'm really leaning, I think, more towards yarrow and then maybe just like seeding. Do you think it's too late for me to seed another tray of yarrow? I was going to text
Um,
you and ask you this earlier.
it's probably late for spring bloom. You might get something out of the fall, but if anything,
Yeah,
you'll get very strong spring plants for next year.
next
So
year.
I would do it
And I
for that
really just want
purpose.
them for like weed, prevention.
And
So,
and I would also do it to attract beneficials, because
yeah.
they've got that spray like format, right? It's a lot easier for the beneficials to get nectar. So I think strategically about putting spray like flowers around my growing area to attract
Hmm.
things like ladybugs, lacewings.
Hmm.
So that could also be a strategy. But I
Yeah,
think
that's true.
my other thought about the dahlias over the daffodils is that if you did like a dahlia and you wanted to dig it, would you potentially disturb
Mess with
the
the other
bulb for
ones.
the daffodils unless that bulb was so deep, which you probably don't want to chew too deep for a daffodil.
Yeah, ours aren't. I mean, there's 6 inches, but it's not. Sometimes when we're pulling them, they
Yeah. So
pop
Jordan,
out
I
and
know
like.
you prepared a daffodils faves list. Yeah, I love for you to go through this. There was a comment that their daffs came in super short last year. Some even bloomed
Mhm.
at the ground level. From what I've been able to research, that can be a function of lack of water during the bud forming stage. That is also what I heard too. But the other thing about daffodil bulbs that is different from tulips is that they actually want a less cooling period. So whereas tulips, you actually want, like we say 5C and 9C, that's Celsius. So 5 degrees Celsius
Mhm.
and 9 degrees Celsius, what is that, like 49 degrees is 9C and 44, 45 is 5C, something like that. Don't hold me to that, but it's
Like, I don't know.
Celsius. And daffodils actually want it closer to that 9C, closer to that 50 degrees.
Mhm.
So if I've heard that if you have it too cold, the daffodils actually may not have longer stems. What's confusing to me about that is when you see perennialized daffodils, for someone like Nicole at Flower Hill
Yeah.
Farm who lives in upstate New York and it gets really cold, she's clearly getting good stems. So I don't know
Mhm.
if that is more of like a year one thing or whatever, but I'm willing to bet that my year two daffodils that have the really short stems are going to do a lot better next year. So we'll see.
Well, and that's kind of what I'm wondering as well. And I don't think I said, but I did order our daffodils all 9C.
Oh.
So yeah, but Edney offers them 9C, so we did get them all 9C. Because I did deal with short stems the prior year, not necessarily on daffodils, but just like in general, short stems on spring crops. So
Mm.
I did order 9C just to be like extra sure that we'd have long stems this year. And we have, except for on a couple of those, but we didn't have our irrigation on. So I think that that's a good point that the person in the comments makes is that like had we been watering them, would we have gotten even longer stems? We tend to get a lot of rain throughout the winter, so like we did fine without it, but
Yep.
I think it could have helped had we had it.
Yeah. So
All
I'm
right,
going to
want to
put
talk through
this
favorite?
I'm
Yeah.
going to put this graphic back on. You go, Jordan.
All right. So retail favorites. So Tahiti, which is behind me, it's just this bright yellow, has like an orange center on it, great long stems, was so good for wrapped bouquets. Mixing it with like a pink tulip was so pretty. They sold so well. People loved them. And then, so that was a little bit earlier in the season. These are ones that have been in the cooler just like for me to have later. So our Tahiti's done already now. But then yesterday we were harvesting extravaganza. And it is like I would say it's like a white, but with like a orange center, but then the leaves have like a green kind of on the outside. Very interesting. But it paired really well with like bright colors. And it was a little later in the season, but also it just had like really great stem length for us. So it was great for a wrap. And then I think we talked about this already, but I do just in general find that I think that retail customers are preferring tulips over daffodils, and that's fine. Like I'm fine with that, but I'm still always going to mix the daffodils in because I'm always trying to think about cost and what makes the most sense for our business. And so when we do 10 stem bunches for wrapped bouquets. We're doing 6 tulips, 2 anemones, and 2 daffodils in every bouquet that we make. And so, since I know that those daffodils are going to come back every year, that's like something I'm really thinking about when we're making those wrapped bouquets to help with our costs so that it's not just all tulips.
Yep. And so you had
Um,
these two here, which a lot of people have been talking about British Gamble. So that is definitely on my list.
okay, so let's talk about like florist favorites. So Pink Charm, holy cow, sold like crazy. But it was also like my very first daffodil to come in. But they all came in like just know on Pink Charm, they like come in, come fast, like they're blooming. It was super hard to catch them in gooseneck stage. One thing for everyone to know is like we don't live on farms, so we live, luckily, thankfully, only 15 minutes away from our farm now. So it's so close. Our old farm was 55 minutes away, and that was painful. But Pink Charm, it opens really fast, so it's difficult to catch in that gooseneck stage. For me, it was maybe not for others, but for me, living off farm, that was difficult. But it sold so well. It was just like I think it was that first taste of spring for all of them. They were so excited to have it. They're using it in like their spring or their Easter. Like one of our florists is doing like an Easter basket arrangement and like has our pink charm daffodils and all of the photo ops for it. It's really cute. But what I will tell you is stem length was fine, but the stems to me are like they're not weak, they're just weaker than other daffodils. They weren't like as long and like thick as some of the other daffodils. So I don't know if that's a variety thing or did I space them too closely together? So TBD on that. I had two different sections of Pink Charm and they both were kind of the same stem wise, so I don't think it was a spacing issue. But also I still love Pink Charm. It's probably one of my, well, I would have said it was my favorite until this year and now I have like 7 million favorites. But British Gamble just started blooming I would probably say like a week and a half ago. We still have plenty in the gooseneck stage, so it's also gotten cold, like cooler here, so things are lasting longer. But oh my gosh, it is so pretty. It has long, strong, like thick stems. So I think if you were, because to me, like they look similar. Um, the picture doesn't make them look similar just because that one of my British Gamble's like been in a vase at my house for a couple of days, and so it's starting to lighten up, but it's a little closer to the same color as Pink Charm. One thing to know about it though is British Gamble's trumpet is a lot larger than Pink Charm. So, and that was what I wanted to make sure that I told you is like if you're selling to florists, I know we're always talking about they're kind of looking for those more like petite blooms. And so Pink Charm may be like a better choice for that. But British Gamble from like an actual stem to me seemed better quality. But I don't know that they would love like it is, I would say like it's just bigger, the trumpet is. So just something to note if you're thinking about that. But I really liked British Gamble. It is a winner and a keeper.
I think one thing to highlight here is even though we're talking about varieties and sharing what is worth growing in our experience, the bigger takeaway is you can hear how Jordan and I think about what varieties to grow per channel, meaning either for florists or for retail. So for retail, a big trumpet is super showy, and that'd be great to
Mm-hmm.
put into your
Yes.
retail bouquets. But florists are not necessarily always looking for the most showy type of flowers that aren't considered focals. Now, in spring, maybe a daffodil could be considered as a focal, but remember, a lot of these event florists are buying in things like roses, ranunculus, maybe they're sourcing them locally. They're not going to want a big, showy daffodil that's going to over trump the other
Mm-hmm.
types of focal flowers that we traditionally prize. So that's why I think that sometimes we actually favor the more petite looking ones that can be good accent flowers. And it's just something to either talk to your florist about or observe what is selling well and what isn't and see if that could be one of the reasons.
Agree, agree. And that's why things like that have like the really tiny blooms can actually be really good for the florist. If you can, like, I couldn't figure out the stem length this year for some reason on our farm. They were just super short. So, like, I couldn't make them work. But also, I went to a florist workshop this weekend and, like, they didn't have the longest stems either there. Like, those didn't. But they're using them, like, lower down, clustered together in the arrangements. So, like, it doesn't always have to have super long stem length, but if it doesn't have super long stem length, like please make sure you're adjusting your prices accordingly. I think is one of the things that's important to note on that.
Yeah, I was at a wedding last night and the wedding had huge centerpieces, and but when you looked at how the structure was being supported, it was literally floral foam and it was really small, and those stems were probably about 6 inches max. So
Mm-hmm.
they're cutting down these stems anyway, but stem length is
Yeah.
always, for whatever reason, it commands a premium if it's longer or shorter. And I would just say that, going back to what Jordan said, the double flowering varieties for daffodils are typically a really safe play. So things like bridal crown is another really good example. That's like a
Mhm.
white double flowering one. And those I feel like are super versatile between retail and the florist. So,
A
Jordan,
bridal
I know
crown.
you had a couple more on here. Did you want to talk about like the Ice King here?
Yeah, Ice King, just a note, like if your florist like a yellow, like a soft, like buttery yellow, this one's like a yellow and a white, and it just is very like interesting. And I didn't put a picture on here, guys, so I'm sorry about that. But it's just a really pretty one, and it came in a lot earlier. It came in with pink charm, so it gave me two different options to sell to them. So it helped with like increasing that cart size when you're selling to florists. So those
Yeah,
two came in together, and really pretty. And those did well. Oh, but they were a little bit on the shorter side for us. So
th-
um,
that's good to
that was
know.
kind of hard.
Yeah, there's a really good comment in here. My bad opinion is it's not bad. I think it's a worthy one to discuss. Daffodil bouquets look suspicious to uninformed customers. They look wilted, and folks just think they are wilted. Florists, however, always love them. So
Yeah.
I think that this is two things. One is the varieties that you're growing, because if you're just growing your traditional yellow daffodils that grow on the side of the road, that's not going to be very attractive to customers. But two, the conditioning piece of it is really, really important. So I actually just did a video on this, on how people really should be dry storing their daffodils if they're trying to hold them for anything above a couple of days. When you store daffodils in water, you actually are impacting the vase life. So even though they look great in the cooler, they look great the few hours when they come out of the cooler, they start making a decline within 36 to 48 hours, depending on the variety. And I've tested this. And when you dry store it, you basically preserve the vase life. So if you are putting your daffodils, even in gooseneck stage, that are flowering in the cooler in water, and you're not using them for over a week, and then you put them into a bouquet, they will either look wilted at a certain point or just look like they're drying out and dying essentially within 48
And I think
hours.
to her point of like they look suspicious in bouquets, yes, I agree, right? Like the customer's like, what is this? It's, it's just closed, looks sad. So what I've done is I try to get one that's like starting to open, or like I will let some of them open and I'm pairing a closed with an open is usually how, because I'm always doing two. And so I'm doing one more open so they can see what it looks like, and then one fully closed. So that's
Super
how I've
great point,
tried
because
to
that's the
like,
same thing with tulips. Like last night I'm harvesting
yeah.
these parrots that are, they probably could be another day in my growing space downstairs. They're hydroponically forced, but I have CSA pickup today and I really needed those stems. I mean, I was telling Jordan this morning, I am running out of stems. I've pre-committed florist orders for later this week, and things are not blooming fast enough outside for me. But anyway, so I'm pairing stems and I'm being very mindful of, I need at least 4 to 5 relatively mature type of looking tulip heads, where if they bring them home, they're going to start opening. And then I can pair that with maybe 3 to 4 other stems that need a little bit more time. So you're
Mhm.
trying to increase the perceived value when someone picks up that bouquet, but you're also in some ways trying to prolong the vase life, because I know that the yellow parrots that I put in there that still need another couple of days to really mature, they're going to extend the vase life of that bouquet by a few days. So to Jordan's point, you can also do that with daffodils. And of course, daffodils have a shorter vase life than tulips, but you can buy yourself an extra 2 days, right, of fresh flowers for the customer by making sure you're staggering those, like the types of bloom maturity in the bouquet.
Yeah, and I would say parrot is one that I definitely always do that with. I'm always trying to do like two that are like perfect harvest age, and one that's like probably like a little further, it's just a little more mature, right? Like it's not what I would like love to be, but I want them to be able to see what it looks like, because I think that visual is very important to the customer. But I think as long as I'm doing like two of this, one of this, right? So that they do have that time. But that's definitely something we do, because the parrots look super boring when
Yeah.
you've like just first harvest. They look completely different. So
Yeah. And one last thing about daffodils, unless if you have anything else to add, Jordan, is sometimes they're not very marketable by the name daffodil. It really depends on where you live. So if you just change that to narcissus,
mm-hmm.
they like, it's a different flower essentially. So
Yeah.
we had a farm that's local to us. They do a lot of retail. They couldn't pay people to buy their daffodils. But once they rebranded it to the scientific name, they started flying off the shelves. So it's all about marketing and branding sometimes.
Yep. I
Yep.
agree. I've
So
tried that. It didn't work for me. But I agree, but it just didn't work.
yeah, but hey, you mix it in bouquets, and I think they look really, really good with the tulips and anemones, which brings us to tulips. I know we have a little bit over
Yeah.
20 minutes left, and tulips, I feel like we could talk about hours for.
Forever. I
So
know.
let's, where do you want to start with tulips?
You want to just dive into like lessons learned, and
Yes.
we can just kind of talk. I think that'll give us something to talk through. Maybe we don't leave it up the whole time, but I can kind of high level talk through. And y'all, these are going to seem like the most basic, like, Jordan, are you stupid? Like, lessons learned. But I don't care. And we're going to talk about them because I think that there's reasoning behind all of them. So I just want to chat through them. So, one of the like huge lessons for me this year, and like thankfully Jesse called it out for me because I was too like deep into tulips at the time to like see what was happening. But like I can't grow single tulips right now. Single tulips have an incredibly short window of harvest time. And if y'all don't know, like, yes, we have a flower farm, but also I work a full time job, consulting, very busy with that. I travel. So what I ran into, and we don't live on farm. So last year, what we had done, and this is why it didn't like, well, I'll just kind of explain like how did we get in this situation? So we had, I want to say, and I don't have all the exact numbers, so I'm going to ballpark it for y'all. We had like 4,000 single tulips in the field, three different varieties. Like we did pink impression, salmon impression, design impression were the three varieties, and I think we had 4,000 of them. Um, Last year, we had all of our tulips in crates, and that's how we grew them. And I had them all on my back patio at my house, and it wasn't large, and it was incredibly difficult to have them there. And then when I ordered tulips, because we all know we have to order tulips extremely early. So when I had ordered tulips, we were supposed to be moved into our new house on the farm. Um, well, none of that ended up happening. We ended up selling our farm. We ended up moving, but I still had 4,000 single tulips coming. So, of course, we made the decision to plant them at the farm. And, but what happened was that Oklahoma heat went crazy for that like first week, that our heat went up to like 80. Well, when that happened, I was out of town for 2 days on a work trip. And, yes, I have a husband that could have gone and harvested the tulips for me, but also I have a 4-year-old child who's a cheerleader and has cheer practice. And, he's holding down the fort here. And so, he does a lot. And I'm not going to ask him to like go harvest while I'm out of town too. And so what we ran into was that our single tulips blew open. 4,000 tulips blew open while I was gone for 2 days. We were able to catch some, like luckily they were a little bit like some were a little bit taller, like just some staggered out. So we were able to get some, but I would say maybe 10% of those were we able to harvest. And so that was a huge loss. So I think a lot of times we hear people saying, like, if you want to be profitable, you should be doing single tulips because they're the cheapest. I think it's very important that you consider your entire fact pattern. And I was at the time because we were supposed to be living on farm, but then we weren't. So what I probably should have done is put those into crates and kept those at my house, but I didn't. I planted them in the field at the farm where I cannot go 3 times, 4 times a day to harvest, which, last year I'd take a 2-minute break, go outside, harvest a bunch of tulips, throw them in the cooler last year. I couldn't do that this year. And I especially couldn't do it when I was in a completely different state while they were blooming. So that was a huge lesson learned,
I
kind of.
I think this is one of probably the best lessons that you learned because
Yeah.
if you're a nurse, if you're a teacher, you don't have a flexible work schedule. Like you're stuck at your job until you come back home. And if I worked in any profession where I don't have that level of flexibility and I don't have things like, how do you say, like perfect environments, right? Like I guess in
Hmm.
this case, Jordan, you could probably throw a shade cloth on, but if you're gone for a couple of days, it doesn't matter if you have that shade cloth on,
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
you really need to be thinking about varieties that are really fast to bloom when the conditions are ripe for that versus those that buy you a little bit more time. So Jordan and I discussed that she would do really well growing more doubles in
Hmm.
that open space, assuming that she's also still off farm and potentially traveling. Because even though a double is also going to be accelerated in terms of the bloom time, you will have definitely a lot more wiggle room and buffer to harvest, right? So I think
Yeah.
a double will buy you even maybe half a day when it's a
Yeah.
really extreme
And when you're
situation.
looking and when you're looking at pricing, we're not talking 10-cent different between bulbs. We're talking,
Like
2 to
five.
3 cents.
Yeah.
Awnings this year, it's like literally like 2 to 3 cent different between, it depends on what varieties you're going to do for your doubles. We're doing less expensive doubles. So, yeah, it's not like a huge difference. And think about how much money that could have saved me had I like had that. There was no way that I could have. So, obviously next year, like Jesse said, we're going to switch to growing just doubles. So, sorry, Ownings, one more time. I'm going to update my order
Well, so
for
one
the
other
third
thing about the
time.
singles, right? Even within singles, there's segmentation in there in terms
Mhm.
of ones that blow out really, really quickly and ones that take a little bit more time. In Jordan's
Mhm.
situation, neither of those types of specific varieties would have really mattered. But I do think for someone like me, I love the Van Eycks. I don't grow the Van Eycks. I don't grow the Van Eycks because even like I would say they're a little bit quicker to bloom as a whole, but once they come out of the cooler, they just blow open. And
Right.
it's not like they have a
Yeah.
terrible vase life, but it's just they open a lot more quickly, and I feel like they
Mhm.
actually do have like a 1 to 2 day less vase life versus the other singles out there. I choose
That's
to
what
grow.
I find with the salmon impression
Yes,
too.
impressions are kind of
Um,
like that too. I don't grow a lot of
you
impressions, just because I find sometimes the stems get a little bit too long, and I don't
yeah.
know if they're going to droop on me. So I stay away from varieties that I know are going to droop or do that. And instead, on the singles that I have, I like to focus on varieties that take a little bit longer to mature in terms of bloom time, but that also provide some sort of like color progression or gradient of color. And that to me
Mhm.
justifies the potential risk that I might have in terms of having them out there and potentially blow open. Right now, I only have one single out there, and it was left over from hydro that I wasn't confident in terms of putting in the trays. And then I have a fringe out there, and fringes also take a little bit longer to mature. So that's also a good alternative for a single. But again, they're going to be priced a little bit higher than your typical like Triumph or Darwin singles.
Right.
Right.
Do you have any triumphs that you love?
Yes. In fact, I would say that I love hydroforcing Triumphs as a whole because Triumphs are among the earliest tulips to bloom.
Mm,
So I love orange. I know not a lot of people love orange, but Delta Storm is a really, really
I
good
love Delta
one.
Storm.
I
Yeah.
believe that Sunrise Dynasty and Tom Pouce are both in the Triumph category, and those are ones that have a really nice color gradient. They're like pink to yellow to peach. So those are
What do you
colors that
find?
work well for both florist and wholesale, or sorry, and
What is
retail.
like the price per bulb for those?
So I'm
Like
buying them
average.
chilled, and they're
Hmm.
definitely, I would say, under 40 cents, probably around 37 cents ish.
Is that
So
little farmhouse flowers?
yeah, and I would say that
Okay.
prices have gone up this year, guys. It was really
Hmm.
bad season last year, compounded by a really bad planting season in the fall. So we're gonna expect the bulb prices to go up a bit. I think maybe Little Farmhouse Flowers might have gone up a little bit more than some of the bigger competitors, which makes sense because she's not very, very big. But the quality of her bulbs is really, really good.
Really
So I
good.
actually do try to keep a lot of my chilled bulbs with her. And
Hmm.
hers ended up being still in the 30-cent range, but upper 30 cents.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious because
Yep.
I was looking at, we had one Triumph that we grew, and I didn't run into that same issue that I did with the Impression series with the Triumph. I was still able to harvest it in time. But it was like 45 cents a bulb. And I'm like, oh, for that price, I would just will get some more doubles. Like
I would get
I
a
don't really want
double. Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
But let's kind of talk about like, okay, well, that's terrible. So next year we're definitely going to grow doubles instead. So then the next thing that we ran into is cooler space. That seems like a very obvious, like Jordan, come on, like cooler space. Okay, but we don't have a walk-in, but we have a good size cooler. I would say, I don't know. I'd say we can fit like at least 16 to 24 buckets in our cooler. Like I think we can fit like I think that's right. And it's somewhere between 16 and 24. I can't remember. I could have told you during Dahlia season, but I don't remember anymore. So I probably just overestimated because I was like, oh, I can fit that many buckets, but buckets don't equal crates. And I could not fit as many crates in as I needed to. So we maxed out our cooler space at about 4,000 tulips when we had way more than that blooming very quickly in the field. Um, so once we got the cooler maxed out, we were like, what do we do? Right? Like our florist sales, because it was so early. And it's not that the florists aren't wanting to buy from us, it's that at this point in time, right now florists are starting to order again. So yay, that's exciting. But at this point, when it was 2.5, 3 weeks ago, they're not having events. The spring events aren't coming. We aren't at Easter. So they're just not they don't have a need for tulips. So we have all these tulips coming in and we're just not getting any sales from florists. And I'm like, okay, what are we going to do? The other thing is because our tulips came in 3.5 weeks early, we sell at the farmer's market where we can move, 1,000 stems in a day. Maybe that's a little high. Let's say, I bet we could move at least 500 to 750 tulip stems in a day at our farmer's market. Um, well, the farmers market doesn't open until April, so we did not have that sales outlet to move it. So we had no florist sales, we had no farmers market sales. So I literally am like, okay, well, we have our flower shed, right? And so it was like, let's get to town on marketing this thing. So I did run some Facebook ads and we did like a fire sale at our farm stand because my thought at this point is like we have more tulips blooming in the field than we have space in the cooler, and I can either take a loss on them and not make anything, or I can run a really killer sale and just get things out the door. Obviously, it's not the price point that we want to be at. Like, we were selling tulips for, we were averaging that first weekend. So, okay, so let's talk about the sale that we ran just so everyone can kind of know, like, here's what we did. So we ran a sale and we did one bouquet for $15. So that, and we do 10 stems in our bouquets. So it's $1.50 per stem. And then we did two for, what'd we do? Two for, I'm running a different sale this weekend. It was two for something, but it made it $1.25 a stem. And then it was three for something and it made it $1 a stem. So three for 30. Most people were going for the 3 for 30 option, which I didn't really anticipate. I really thought that they would do more of like the two. So I thought we'd be at like $1.25, and I was okay with that. The dollar is like definitely lower than what I wanted to be at, but still better than not making any money. So we opened our farm stand on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday all day long, and we moved 1,000 stems in that weekend. So one, we also went up, I would say probably like 300 to 400 followers on Facebook from running that ad. And it was just like a $15 Facebook ad. Running the ad and the sale, we increased our following. And now I feel like we have like a good customer base. So
Well,
that
so
was our
Jordan,
strategy.
I have a couple of follow-up questions for that because yes, obviously everyone says have a cooler. I feel like you have a pretty big cooler. Probably for you and your size, you do need a walk-in cooler as an
Yeah,
upgrade. But it's not like
we're
4,000
not there
tulips
yet.
isn't a lot of tulips. That's a lot of stems to fit into a cooler. I certainly can't fit that much.
Yeah.
So you talked about moving stems at basically the dollar to $1.25 mark, which for me would be unacceptable from like a
Mhm.
long-term perspective. I totally understand
Yes.
that if you're in a pinch, obviously it's better than having a negative return, right? So at least you can
Mhm.
break even, we'll call it.
Right.
What
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
your ideal per price stem that you would like to go towards in the future?
So if I'm going to be selling them retail, I want to be at $2 a stem. If I'm selling them wholesale, I want to be at $1.50 a stem. And so that was really, so when we ordered our tulips, we did 12,000 tulips intentionally. So we did 4,000 for farmers market. We didn't know we would have the farm stand, so I technically didn't order any for the farm stand. So I did 4,000 for market, 4,000 for florist, and then I was going to do 4,000 just to sell the bulbs. I just, because we ended up moving farms, we were super busy at that time of year. So I ended up just planting them. Um, so I didn't anticipate us having 12,000 coming in, or else I probably would have made sure we had a better, cooler situation. But the $1.50 a stem is, the price point that we would anticipate that we were selling them at wholesale. So moving 1,000 at $1 a stem wasn't ideal. We wanted it to be at that $1.50 mark because, we had set aside 4,000 tulips to sell to florists at $1.50, 4,000 for retail at $2. And so that was always kind of, so we're selling for lower than we want to be at this point. But what else that it was either we had a total loss on them. And so that's what we did the first weekend. And then we went into this weekend, and this was this weekend. So it was 2 weekends ago that we did the sale. So then we went into this weekend and I readjusted our sale price. So we're still running a sale because I am finding that our customers are buying more when we're offering discounted, like scaling, prices. And at this point, we still, our cooler is still packed full, and we're able to sell everything we have in the field just like by the day at this point.
But Easter's
So,
coming up, so you're going to have a lot to offer for Easter, and that's going to be a really popular weekend.
yeah, so this weekend we did, so last weekend we were averaging $1 a stem. This weekend we're averaging $1.50 a stem out of our farm stand. And we've moved, oh, I want to say like almost, no, we're a little over 600 stems that we've moved out of the farm stand this weekend because we've done 61 bouquets, but it's opening at noon today. So I anticipate we'll get to probably 71 to 75 by the end of the weekend.
Yep, yep. And then you had a third one on this chart over here, Dear Love
Uh,
Tulips.
Dear Love Tulips. So this one I don't really have any good excuses for other than like we were just so busy with farm infrastructure and trying to get everything into the ground and do all the planning. And then my job was really busy. And guys, I did not protect our tulips, and that was a mistake
I mean,
because
granted,
we have like
you came from a farm where they didn't eat your tulips.
they didn't mess with anything. Like we had deer at the old farm, and we didn't have tulips at the old farm because the tulips at our old house, but we had our entire dahlia field last year with 2,000 dahlias in it. They never touched. We had all of our annuals, all of our sunflowers. They didn't touch anything at the old farm. At this new farm, these deer, they like to eat. There's like families of them. Like they come in like a pack of 10. And they like to eat stuff. So,
That's
yeah,
a
so they
hard,
grazed
hard
over.
lesson. And it sucks
Well,
because they always
it
seem
sucks.
to eat stuff when it's like almost at maturity. It's like just eat it when it's in a baby stage so that way I can take my
They
loss
okay, so
earlier.
I got lucky. They did eat it when they were just starting to come up, and they just grazed over the top of our design impression, which we didn't even really get to harvest very many of them. But on the ones that we did, like you can see that the leaf is eaten. So I just was making sure we were taking, I was still able to sell, like the 10% that we were able to harvest from that. I just had to, it was just more labor intensive because I had to take all the leaves off because they ate the top of them. But luckily, like it didn't impact any of the blooms. And so we immediately, once we saw that they were getting grazed over, got a deer fence quote and were quite in shock about that. What was it? It was like $30,000 to get our farm. Was that what it was? 33?
Well,
It was
yeah, you
crazy.
you also have a very big area. So for
Yeah.
context, Eric and I did our
Our beach
own,
maker.
and it's 40 by 90 feet. We ordered the parts, and it came out to about $2,200. So deer protection is not cheap, but they're for us, like our deer pressure is so bad that I really cannot put anything outside of like mint and daffodils. Like
Hmm.
the stuff that they really hate, I can put outside, but I've put out things like astilbe, salvia, like they've eaten all of it. Like
Mm.
I don't have any lupin
Yeah.
for 2 years because they've been eating it. So things that should be deer resistant are not deer resistant for us. And honestly, it's just going to get worse because with the weather patterns and getting super dry in the summers, they are desperate and they just want to eat
Yeah.
stuff. So yeah, I see a
We
Lori
ended up
saying
just
heavy
doing
sod.
like a
Yep.
little fence, like a our tulip row. It's not all filled in, but it's like our rows are 4 foot by 120 foot. So like Derek just fenced in that four
Yeah.
foot by 120 foot,
And
and
that's
that
really
worked.
smart. And that actually made me realize that I could potentially expand outwards of my deer
Yeah.
fence without needing to actually put on a real deer fence, but I'm not near the stage of doing that right now. And I
I
actually
did tell Jessie though that she had told me like do not plant your lilies in there. Don't do it. They're gonna come in. Like sure enough, I planted lilies in there last weekend and my husband told me last night like they got into the deer fence and ate the lilies.
I
I'm like,
swear, like
oh,
lilies are on the higher part of the totem pole when it comes to tastiness
we
for
just
these
loved
deer.
them.
They love lilies. It's like candy. Someone here asked, "Is anyone doing a daffodil location?" And so for me, because of the amount of daffodils I will be planting, I plan to put them all out where the deer graze because I know I can do
Mm,
it. So that will be my daffodil location.
good idea.
Yeah. But so Jordan, I mean, you have been moving a ton of stems. You've been doing a lot. I think one thing that we should be talking about is this photo over here and the realities of what it's like farming, especially for you off farm at this scale and having a job and just, I mean, at a certain point, it's letting things go, right? And understanding just this was a
Yeah.
difficult lesson. This was one of those lessons where you almost need to pay the price in order to learn it. I've been in that situation too.
Mhm.
So I'm going to let you go ahead and
Yeah.
air your thoughts on this
So
one.
I know. So in that same 2 days that I was gone, and it was 2 days, I was gone like a Monday, all day Monday, and I didn't get back till like late on a Tuesday. So I had harvested Sunday, and everything was picked clean on Sunday before I left. And then this is what I came back to on Wednesday. By the time I was able to go harvest after work on Wednesday, yeah. So it all just blew open, and so. I think on the daffodils, I feel less pressure to have to harvest every stem since they will come back every year. But it's unfortunate, right? But I think that that's part of it. That if you choose to have, a very busy career and a job outside of your farm, you're going to have losses, right? If you plant on a really large scale, or even if you're not planting on a large scale, like things happen and you're gonna have times when you can't harvest every stem. It sucks. I hate that. I should never have fields that look like that. It's like a slap in the face every time you drive up to it because it's disappointing, right? Because they still look like that. I'm not going to waste my time harvesting all of them now because what's the point? I can't sell them. So I've got to have lots of beautiful daffodils in my house though. But yeah, it's definitely a bummer. Let's think strategies for what I would do different next year. My husband definitely looked at me the other day and said, like, I think it's time, like, that we have to hire someone to help with harvesting. And I absolutely agree. I think that, had I offered to pay, and we've done this at this point, like, we'll pay someone 20 an hour to come out and help me when I'm harvesting. It's usually like family friends at this point that we're just like, hey, like, I'm going to go harvest today. Like, do you want to come out for a couple of hours? It's worth paying them that. And we have that factored in, like, to all of our enterprise crop planning budgets. It's worth paying someone to come out and help us so that we don't have that much loss, right? Because if I had paid someone to go out and harvest that, then I would have those for the farmer's market, in 2 weeks from now. And at this point, well, I do still think we'll have daffodils because I don't know, there's just so many. But we would have had so many more that we could have used as sellable stems. So unfortunate, but also we didn't have cooler space for them. So I don't know where they would have gone. And that was probably my mindset that I was in at that point, was because I knew I had maxed the coolers, and I had maxed the coolers on the Sunday before I left for my trip. Coolers were completely full. So if I would have paid someone to go harvest, they didn't have anywhere to put it. And so we did talk about, like, do we get another fridge? Just like another cheap one. We can fit 4 crates because we have our big cooler, and then now we have a second fridge, but only because, like, we just moved into a rent house that already had a fridge, so we brought ours. So we can fit 4 crates in, like, just like a small fridge. I don't know. We talked about, like, do we just start buying a bunch of small fridges? I don't feel like I know we grow a lot. I don't feel like we are at a point where we should be investing in a cooler. I don't know. I'm not
I
ready
think you
for that
should.
yet.
I think you guys should retrofit a small shipping container because I feel like that you guys do enough volume, but it kind of depends on how the on-farm experience goes this year. I think that for you, obviously the expectation was that the tulips were not going to come in March and they were going to come closer
No.
to your market, at which point you
Yeah.
would have been able to hold them in the amounts that you were growing, and
Mhm.
move them very quickly. So I think that, look, it's just a lesson that Mother Nature is always going to throw at us, right? So it's almost like either you readjust down how much you're growing, maybe you put some into the U pick area, or you do invest in more cooler space, right? Like there's a few ways of going about it, but I don't necessarily see this as I always see failures as good things because especially
Mhm.
as a year two farmer for Jordan, year three for me, success without failure, in my view, is always an illusion, unless if you've had crazy experience doing this stuff before, because it gives you sometimes, how do you say it, like a sense of confidence that may not be right for where you are. And the failures allow you to succeed faster. So my goal when I approach any kind of business is how do I fail fast so that I can
Mhm.
succeed faster? And so I've been posting a lot on my shorts about just the failed hydro tulips that I've been having in my basement. Like I've basically had at this point above 60% attrition, and my later successions that I thought were going to be doing a little bit better actually are not doing as great as I thought that they are or that they should be doing. And I'm totally fine with that because I've now pretty much realized where I went wrong. I went back with the tulip workshop, one of the assistant teachers, and we started hypothesizing, and I realized what went wrong. So I'd rather fail at a scale of losing 1,500 to like 3,000 tulips versus losing like 7,000 to 10,000 tulips, right? Because I want to
Mhm.
scale up next year. So like you should always learn something from your failures is what I'm trying to say. And so Jordan and I have these talks but also text back and forth around these failures and like what does that mean for next year going forward, right? So if you don't have a flower friend to do that, I definitely
Oh,
recommend
you need
you
one.
find one.
I can't imagine if I didn't have you to do, because we do. We just text back and forth all day of, like, random things that pop into our head all day long.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly helpful. Like, everyone needs a flower friend like that.
And
It's so
20% of it
helpful.
might be look at this pretty flower, maybe less than 20%. Most of it is really around what should I be doing better? Like that's the
Yeah,
gist of the conversation, right? So
always.
it's nice to have that person to brainstorm with.
Wait,
There
I also oh, go ahead.
no, you go first.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I wanna touch on hydro too, from my perspective, on my end. So I know that Jesse has done hydro very successfully, and it's impressive.
In the
I
beginning of
think
the
what
season.
Well, that's just in general, being able to, like, do it and keep up with it. because I've done it now, like it is a lot of work. Um, so I think what I realized, and I think this is just like you have to like know yourself on whether something works for you. And for me, I am not organized enough to do hydroponic forcing. I'm not. I can't like I really did learn like I would rather dump my tulips in the field and have to deal with what I'm dealing with right now to the I'm so exhausted. I would rather do that than to have to like have this worry in the back of my head constantly of like need to check the tulips, need to check the tulips, like gotta water, gotta move trade. Like I couldn't do it. And the other thing was is I couldn't move them. They even and at the time like we probably had a smaller customer base at our flower shed farm stand. Um, so maybe they would move better now, but I was just finding that we didn't have a market for them here in the winter. I had like one florist, two florists that were like consistently buying from us if we had stems. But I think for me, for what I need as someone who has spent 2 years in a row building a brand new farm twice now, I need winter off this next year. And so y'all hold me to this. I'm not hydro forcing. I'm sure at some point I'd be like, no, I'm going to. But I just need that. I think for me, what I need in order to like be my best at this point in the year is that I need that time of rest for me. And so while Jesse is like incredibly successful at it, I think you've got to know like what your strong points are. And while I am like actually like a very organized person, I found hydro stressful for me, and I couldn't market, I couldn't get them to sell. And I think I just need that like period of rest
I
while
think
I'm
that's
working a full-time
yeah.
job. And yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And rest is obviously key. So my rest comes in the summer, or that's how I want
Mhm.
to structure it. But I think for me, part of the appealing part of hydro, so to Jordan's point, it is very labor intensive. And I think that if you live in a climate where it's difficult to grow tulips like Jordan, you can be really successful with field grown tulips and fetch a price point that makes sense for you. This is why I stand firmly on my ground of it cannot be lower than $2 a stem for my winter tulips, because when I
Mhm.
factor in the cost, it really is a higher how do you say, like higher labor than I expected, because I think if you
But
plant
I could only get $1.50 a stem, and that was a struggle,
and
which
that's
is what made it
unacceptable to
not
me.
make
Yeah,
unacceptable, and
in terms
it
of the
made it
work.
not make I
Yeah.
couldn't be profitable with it.
Yeah.
And so I was like, why am I exhausting myself trying to do this thing that it's just not working?
Yeah. And I think that for me, because when it comes to the spring, which is a really good time to sell flowers, so for all of you newer flower farmers out there, this time is like go time right now. If you have flowers, you
Mhm.
should be able to move them pretty easily. But for me, because I am pivoting to selling mostly wholesale, I am selling with 8 other growers, of which 4 of them have high tunnels. They have greenhouses. Some of them now are going to have heated greenhouses. So it's really hard for me to compete this time of year with the traditional ranunculus. I could probably do something like anemones, but they're also growing a ton of them. So I think about where does it make sense for me to specialize, even if it might take a little bit more work, and I back off on the other parts of the season. Because for me, I see still a high level of demand for local flowers in the winter, even with our florists,
Mhm.
even though Jordan's not seeing that. So it's going to look different for everyone depending on where you live. But I think this is a part of that calculation, right?
I think you make a great point because my crop, my like specialty crop that I'm growing is dahlias. And so for us, that's June, July, August, September, October. I'm doing dahlias and I'm doing dahlias extensively and at very high volume. And I cannot do winter too. At some point, I have to allow myself to rest. I am actually leaning towards maybe also taking August off just because it's insanely not off. Like I will still do the farmer's market, but I am planning on like cutting our dahlias back at the very end of July. There's a lot of weddings in July for some reason. Last year there was. So I'm planning on cutting them back and letting them reflush out for the fall. So I'm considering taking some time off in August, but I just need, because our main crop is dahlias, I need to allow myself to not also be doing something in the winter and actually, have some time to spend with my family and
Totally.
rest.
Totally. So I know we're way over time, but we actually have a really good question that I do want to answer,
Yeah.
which is, would it be safe to say we should be purchasing daffodil bulbs now since you purchased what's in bloom? I'm definitely interested in those varieties.
Yes. So, things you should be purchasing now if you haven't already, like our ranunculus and anemone order, what we submitted that probably 2 months ago at this point, Jesse.
Yes, it's crazy because nothing was even showing buds at that point, at least for me.
Yeah, but it was probably 2 months ago. And then daffodil and tulip orders, we did those what, maybe 2.5, 3 weeks ago,
I will say
right?
about 70% of my tulip orders are in. I'm waiting
Yeah.
for an availability sheet from NBC. And then daffodils, I still haven't ordered yet. I actually, no, sorry. I ordered 2 crates so far, but I definitely want to order at least maybe like 10 to 15 more crates. And I feel like daffodils are still flying a bit under the radar when it comes to flower farmers.
Me
So
too.
you typically see more availability even with the more popular varieties versus things like tulips. Like if you weren't
So I
on it for
will
copper image,
say,
it's gone, like, yeah.
yeah.
So
Labella Pock, that's the one I was trying to think of earlier. Labella Pock, that's the one that like I can never get my hands on, and that's the one that they love here. I will say that though that we did get some of our daffodils canceled last year. So the very popular varieties, like get your orders in now, and maybe order them from like awnings or little farmhouse flowers, and like be intentional of that. If you have companies that are always changing your orders and canceling your orders, maybe don't order from them again the next year, and maybe order from the suppliers that you know are going to get the bulbs to you. So I would just say if you're looking at some of the more popular varieties of daffodils, just like be intentional of who you're ordering from.
yeah.
And
So
Ownings is who Little Farmer's Flowers doesn't have her daffodils out yet,
she doesn't
right?
have her daffodils out yet.
I'm
Ownings
still waiting
does.
on that.
ADR also has them. It's a little bit late now, but ADR always
I did order
offers
from
a
them last
before
year
spring
too.
sale. So they actually give you 10% off your order. And I always make sure to get my ranunculus,
Are
now
they still
daffodils.
doing that or is it done?
It's done. It was until the
Okay.
1st of spring. So usually that
Uh,
covers my freight and a little bit more. I end up ordering some mascari, by the way. I have
I should
like
know the answer to this, Jesse, but I don't. I want to talk about Mascari too. But on ADR, do you have to pay at time of purchase or is that at
no,
time of
they
shipment?
bill you whenever
Okay.
they
Can
ship
remember.
it. Yeah. So
Okay.
ADR was really great for my daffodil bulbs. I
Yeah.
like
Mine
to
too.
yeah, ideally I like to spread my orders across a variety of suppliers. So
Hmm.
typically I've been using Onings for lily bulbs. I've gone now to another supplier to test them for lily bulbs, but I might also try them for some tulips. A lot of the
Hmm.
growers at my
Lots of our
co-op
tulips
actually
from
use
them.
Onings, and Onings has a warehouse in New Jersey where if you buy at least 4 crates, you can get it shipped out of New Jersey. So depending on where you are in the US, it could make sense to actually buy from Onings. But
Yeah.
believe it or not, New Jersey is a pretty big area for tulip distribution. Like Netherland Bulb Co., I think actually has their office in South Jersey. So if you're East Coast, it's actually nice. ADR's up in New York. So yeah, sorry,
Mm.
Jordan, you're like smack in the middle of the country.
I know. Like, and nothing's close to us. It's always expensive shipping to get it here.
Yeah,
But we do try. Kind of, I thought it was really smart. Like when we and I talked the other day about like, yes, we want to spread our bulb orders out, but also being conscientious of like
freight,
shipping costs when we're
freight.
doing that and
Yeah.
considering your freight. And so most of our tulip order is ownings this year. But we had such good luck with them. But there's probably about like 5 varieties that I couldn't get through them. A couple of them ADR has, a couple of them I'm just not sure where I'm going to get them from.
Oh
So we
yeah.
are also going to
Yeah,
spread
at
ours
this
out.
point, I think I've ordered over 20 crates for Little Farmhouse Flowers, which definitely qualifies me for freight. And so if I think about our treated bulbs, which is where I get them from, I'm always like, I'll just add to that because the shipping is going to be negligible once it gets to a freight. So I'm not going to be ordering chilled bulbs from another supplier for that reason.
Hey,
So yeah,
explain that for people. I know what you're talking about, but only because I had a long conversation with Derek about it yesterday because I didn't understand it. So maybe explain that. I know we're kind of
oh,
at the end, but I think you should explain that to people on what you mean when you say that because
okay,
I
yes, no,
I didn't understand it.
that's a really good point. Okay, so when you order a crate, usually it's shipped to you in a box because it's just a crate. When you order a certain amount of crates, usually the minimum is like 14 or 15 crates. Like we're talking about the tulip bulb crates. Then it qualifies for like a pallet. So what happens is it's shipped through a different like truck, even though it still might be UPS, it's actually UPS LTL, which is less than something less than
I don't know.
I forget what it stands for, but basically they're shipping to typically commercial businesses using a pallet, and they actually call you to schedule a time to deliver because they are offloading a pallet and they need to like deliver it to a certain location. They'll ask you if you have like a docking station or whatever it is, so you benefit a
And
lot
I
from
think
that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Talk about they can deliver residential,
They can
right?
deliver
There's
residential,
a
yes.
tool. I always got so worried about that in the beginning, like year one, I just didn't understand how that worked, and now I've seen them do it multiple times. So now I understand. There's like a tool that they have, they can deliver
Yes.
it, and they can bring it up to your driveway.
Yes, and
So
the
like
poor
you can
person,
still
delivery
order it
person
freight.
is like literally pushing it up our driveway.
Yeah,
We have a very, very long driveway, but it usually comes in a much longer truck too. So like sometimes the houses are a little bit difficult to access depending on where you are, but they always figure out a way. So they call you for appointment, they deliver it. Usually they'll deliver it to like wherever uh you have driveway access to, so they're not going to go through gravel or grass, just as a heads up. But typically we have them deliver it to the end of our driveway, and we use our tractor with a fork attachment lift to bring it back into our garage. But the pricing difference is really huge. So for example, a crate usually will ship for around $50. If they're really local to you, maybe $25, but you're looking at about $25 to $50 range for these big distributors for crates. So that adds up, especially per
quick.
bulb. So if you qualify for freight shipment, I'll give you an example. I had freight shipped from upstate New York. I live in New Jersey. That freight shipment cost me about, we'll call it like $350 for 15 crates. Adding an
Hmm.
additional crate on top is only going to be probably like another like $10, $15. So the
Yeah,
amount that you add on in terms of shipping fees is really going to go down and average out to a lower cost per bulb the more you buy, right? So that's why like if you're going to buy 20 crates total, you might want to consider buying at least 15 of them from one place, if not
one.
all of them from one place. Yeah,
Yeah.
because that less than truckload. Thank you. Yes, less than a truckload. That's what it
Yeah.
stands for.
So then
Yeah.
the question I had for Derek the other day was like, okay, so then like how high can it go? And he was like, no, it can go
It
like
can go
very high.
really,
Because I
really
was
high.
like, our order has 22 crates on it right now.
Oh
And I was
no,
like,
like
so like how many? He was like, don't worry about it. You're
I
not
think
going
you
to
could
hit the
probably fit
number.
60. I
Yeah,
like
that's what he
I
told
don't
me.
know
And I was
how
like,
much
oh,
the
okay.
wood pallet can actually withstand in terms of weight, but from a height perspective, I think that's less of a limiter than what the wood can take.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I've
And I
actually
think
even
our freight cost was about 352 from New Jersey to here
there
from
you
for
go.
last
Yeah,
year.
because so what less than truckload actually means is that they are they're putting together all of the different pallets from different orders together, similar to like a normal shipping vehicle. And that's why we all benefit from the shared cost of sharing a truck, right? It's less than a full truckload for you to ship because you don't have enough inventory to fill up entire truck, right? So these logistic companies are basically pooling all of these pallet orders together. It really is the most efficient way to ship. Like it's way cheaper than what people think. And if you ever order what you believe to be a high quantity, always ask them how many crates or whatever it is, because you ordered hydro trays. You're like, how many does it
Yeah.
take to get to freight? And typically
So I
that
can
will
get
be
freight.
cheaper than
Yeah.
shipping like 10 crates. Right. So shipping like 15 crates might actually be cheaper than shipping 10 crates. So
Hmm.
always something to consider. Yeah,
And I think
shipping's really
one
huge.
of the other things is that anytime you're ordering anything, like, and someone's giving you a freight quote on it, you can get your own freight quotes. Like, you don't have to use their freight company. So, my husband does a lot with freight in his day job. And so, I always have them send me all of the dimensions and whatever the three things are that he needs me to get. And then we always get our own freight quotes because I might be able to find someone way cheaper to go get it for
Yes.
us than what they're going to charge us. Also, on compost deliveries, think about that as well. Sometimes, if you're going to have compost delivered, I mean, it was like largely different. The price that like my guy who has a truck would go get it for and bring it to me, it was like he's going to charge me like 75 a load to get it versus like they wanted to charge me like 300. So really like be smart about those because those are things, those costs can like really add up. But just something to consider.
Yeah, I've had to arrange my own freight back in the day when I had that soap company, and I
Hmm.
saw ranges between like $200 to $700. So there really is a pretty like wide range that's worth looking at. And then one other thing is that if for some reason you have self-storage that is climate controlled, you can actually ship less than truckload directly to those storage facilities, and the people there, like I used to use CubeSmart, will actually unload it for you and put it into a storage facility. So like those storage facilities, even though they might be temperature regulated, they're obviously not like cooler regulated. But if you needed like farm materials or whatever it is and you need to store it, like that's actually a really good alternative because sometimes they require like a docking station to unload. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I am lucky that my husband has a docking station at his work. And so if we have things coming in, like our high tunnel that came in, I just send it to his work to get unloaded. And then he just brings it, we have a trailer and he brings it home from there. So we are fortunate that because I actually don't think the trucks could make it in. We're on a one-way road at the new farm. And so that was actually really great. One of our followers was like, hey, like really want you to make sure you're considering when you're planning. She like had my back on making sure we had a way in and out for trucks. And I was like, okay, that's like
Yeah,
very
our
smart.
truck needs
Because
to stop at the street basically, so he blocks
yeah,
one lane because there's no way you can pull in and out, right? So
I think you
I
know how Flower Hill Farm has to like go meet hers like way, I don't know if you've ever seen it. I think we would have to do the same thing because we're on a private road. And I don't even think because he'd have no way of turning around if he came in. So I think we'd have to meet him like up at the highway.
Yeah. So this turned into a shipping conversation for the last 10 minutes. I hope
Very
it
much
was
random
helpful
topic.
because, yeah, this is stuff that we've had to figure out on our own. And I think that people don't really build in the cost of shipping. So when I buy bulbs, I am always thinking, okay, adding an extra, whatever, 3 to 5 cents. And if I'm not getting
Yeah.
it by freight, it's going to be a little bit more. And what does that
Hmm.
mean for my margin? So just making sure that you guys are also thinking about that too. Um, I feel like we probably could have talked about tulips for
For
another
so long.
full hour.
I
If
know, like I
there
still
are,
have more questions. How does this happen at the end of these? I'm like, we
right?
talked so much. I'm still like,
Right?
but what?
Yeah, so definitely let us know if you have any more questions on tulips. I will be putting out a video on harvesting, storage, all that good stuff in the next week or so. And then the other thing here is that speaking about buying wholesale, I think a lot of you guys have heard me say this. I will be expanding to daffodil bulbs as well as those mascari bulbs later in the season. And my goal is to be able to ship basically a crate to you. So you'll get the bulb crate, but divide that 500 quantity down to maybe about like 4 varieties or so. So you're getting smaller varieties, but not something that's overwhelming because some of you don't need 500 of the same tulip or daffodil, right? So I'll be allowing mixing and matching of tulips and daffodils within a crate, and hopefully that will also be more cost effective. Like I'm always keeping in mind what could be a profitable margin for you guys if I sell it wholesale like that, and obviously compensating me for my time. So I'm trying to build that profitability piece in there, and I try to be very transparent about this will work really well because you can perennialize these and
Mhm.
you'll definitely get a return on them. For tulips, right, it's a little bit harder because they're treated as annual. So even when I'm buying tulip bulbs this year, I'm thinking about if I resell these, I'm buying these bulbs in at like 59 cents plus freight, and then I have to resell it to you guys. Does that make sense? Right. So I've actually backed away from certain varieties because I know it doesn't make sense to resell it to
Yeah.
you guys. So more to come on that later. But Jordan, as always, great conversation. Thank you for being on here. And
Yeah.
we'll see you
Thanks.
all in a few weeks for another live.
See you guys.
Bye, guys. Okay, awesome. Um, we actually
Wait,
didn't
my
have.
last
Oh,